Hi, Nicholas. We're excited to do a follow up podcast with you to learn more about your career and your writings and everything in between. Just a quick recap. Could you tell us about a bit about yourself and what do you do today?
Um, I lead digital and analytics at McKinsey. I founded McKinsey Analytics a couple of years ago, and I'm also the chairman of QuantumBlack, which is our data science and data engineering outfit.
So, you divide time across both McKinsey and QuantumBlack?
That's correct.
Okay, wonderful. I want to dive straight in. You wrote a brilliant article for the Harvard Business Review, which talked about data translators and other folks who sit in between people who are technical and non-technical. Could you introduce that concept to the audience?
Yeah, I think the idea of a translator is somebody who is um, deep, deeply knowledgeable about how data science and analytics is used in order to improve business performance, often in a particular domain. So a lot of companies have the following struggle. They would like to scale analytics and AI. The opportunity is often quite distributed, i.e., in a steel plant in many process steps, or parts of the factory, or even different types of assets, different types of products. So it's a distributed opportunity, and in theory, you want to deploy hundreds of use cases across an entire business, which is very distributed. And you can't essentially afford to have AI teams everywhere. And so you need to somehow have a transmission between whoever runs the business, i.e., for example, the engineers in the plant, or the sales reps or sales managers, and the analytics efforts. And that is what we think a lot of leading companies are doing. They're training up essentially their staff, their own staff, in order to become proficient enough to understand the outputs of machine learning, AI tools. Some of them are even getting trained on modeling themselves, and work essentially in collaborative cross-functional teams with AI experts, machine learning, data scientists, production engineers, scrum masters, and so on, in a collaborative way around certain business problems. So that if you scale this, that in a company you might have thousands of different translators who work on business problems, who however get support from a small center of excellence, which may only have hundreds of people or even less. In some smaller companies, maybe even tens of, just a dozen of technical people who work with a broader group of translators around.
Yeah, and you mentioned that even McKinsey is trying to do the same and has already started creating data translators within.
Absolutely. So what we have done, essentially, we are on a journey to train our own colleagues in this, and we have taken thousands of people through a formal training where we provide them with the tooling and the understanding of how they can apply that. And the way how we describe the profile of a translator also in McKinsey is essentially people who are often having a STEM type background. However, they are, maybe experts in a particular area like banking or supply chain or marketing, and all it is they then learn analytics techniques to apply them to their particular environment, and they become good at the domain, but also at understanding the outputs and working with data scientists. In some cases, they go then to the level of writing, either composing code or writing code themselves. That depends on area. Like in risk modeling, for example, that is quite frequent.
I see. What I found really exciting about the article was that it mentioned that there'll be 2 to 4 million jobs that will be created as data translators. Now that's a huge new category, and it's something that less number of people are thinking about. Are there more kinds of jobs or new kinds of sectors which will open up, which will lead to more jobs? Because somehow the notion of jobs in AI always comes up, and I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think you could study some of the work the McKinsey Global Institute has done. They have done quite a lot of work on the frontiers of AI and what it means. We have also done quite a few publications on the future of work, and you are welcome to add these links to this cast.
Yeah.
And the on a high level, there is always quite a bit of focus on all the changes AI will bring to certain professions. And the kind of work I'm talking about is looking at that about a third of two-thirds of the world's jobs will change by a third over the next decade. So it's a pretty fundamental shift. But it is balanced by, at the same time, as you are saying, by new profiles. And if you think about the job of an app developer didn't exist before this thing existed, and obviously, and that is only a good decade available at scale. Other jobs which will there will be a whole set of cyber type jobs. There will be a whole set of behavior management type jobs, for example, to manage the consequences of the use of technology, which I think a lot of people have written about. There was a lot of papers this year at Davos on this topic. When it comes, however, to the scaling of AI, I think the single most important question is not so much the technology and the code and the mathematical models. At the end of the question, the end point of scaling technology or AI into companies is to improve performance. So the way how I would think about this is they have many companies have done Lean and Six Sigma type improvement programs. And this just becomes the next toolkit. This is essentially, if you want to be a supply chain manager, if you want to be a marketing manager or sales leader in the future, you have to be able to work with these tools. And technology is kind of coming, the way of management, because it will be ever easier to compose tools on top of existing platforms in order to improve certain business outcomes. So that's the essence of translator, and I think that will be applied to almost any kind of job where decisions are being made from data, and that goes all the way from logistics companies which manage their network performance to banks who kind of manage customer and risk, to pharmaceutical companies which make the pharmaceutical clinical development more effective. So in all these areas, you will simply as a basic tooling in order to do your job, to know the way how to analytics and AI works. You need to be able to interpret models, statistics. You need to be able to make sense of these things in order to do your job. So then that's kind of the essence of what we think a translator is.
I know we discussed this briefly in Davos, but what happens to the poets and artists if everything is STEM and everything is AI? Do they still have a role in the future?
No, well, of course, actually a more important role. We were in this discussion mostly focused on what do companies and enterprises and companies and governments do in order to scale the impact from analytics and AI. And then obviously there might even be more need for completely different professions in a world where also productivity is much higher and people have more time to consume the outputs of what poets and artists are producing.
Right. Your career itself, your academic background is so eclectic. It was like deeply technical, then you went to Harvard for an MBA, you're also a PhD. I wanted to understand, once you've invested so much time in learning, how easy or difficult is it to unlearn? Because people say that one sector that will be redefined completely in the future is education, especially higher education. Do you have any thoughts on that? As a student, did you think you'll be doing what you're doing today?
No, not at all. It was obviously not foreseeable, and I think the one thing about myself and something on education on my own journey is not an atypical development. When you work in a very you know inspiring professional environment like McKinsey, where you are exposed to very smart people and very significant client problems, and that's kind of never changing and ever accelerating. You have essentially the ability to learn about particular industries or about particular problems, so to speak, on the job from day one, and that is essentially a model of lifelong learning, which you know. And in my personal example, I learned a lot about how pharmaceuticals and healthcare is working, and how to essentially, you know, from making drugs to, you know, selling and commercializing medicines to how to make healthcare systems better and safer. And then how to apply data and AI as tools in that process. And I think that's just an iterative experiential learning journey, as you know, adults learn by experience, not by necessarily only by classroom. And I do think that education systems need to think about that kind of change. For example, right now it takes 14 to 15 years to make a doctor, from, you know, first year medical school to being a surgeon with license to operate as a consultant. In the UK and other countries have similar length. And a lot of that time is actually the absorbing facts and learning about particular substance of, you know, how chemistry works, how biology works, how physiology works, and then, you know, and certain techniques like surgical techniques and so on. That's kind of a 14 to 15 year journey. If you think about the current speed of change, you know, some people think in 2029 singularity will arrive, and you know, by which time it probably there's very little point in learning all of chemistry as in a textbook form, like learning the facts, so to speak. So universities will need to get into more experiential learning, into more technology-supported learning, less focusing on the, you know, memorizing of facts, more into adapting, working with technology and dictionaries and libraries and tools in order to you know, combine knowledge and a particular problem or a particular technique. So I do think there is a pretty fundamental change in education needed, which isn't helped by the way how education is funded, which is very kind of conservative.
You know, you've often spoken about public-private partnerships in both your writings about health and data science. What is the one challenge that you stumble into in different areas? It doesn't need to be specific to your clients here, but anywhere, like what could we do to make public-private partnerships more effective when it comes to AI deployment?
I think there's two particular challenges. The first one is skills. And the second one is trust, particularly when it comes to data. So taking those in turn. On skills, I think in order to work at the intersection between a public services system and a private system, you have to essentially on both sides have essentially knowledgeable practitioners who are able to interact and agree certain protocols or certain technologies or certain data sets and so on. And when it comes to, for example, the combination of pharmaceutical companies trying to work with healthcare systems, or a combination of maybe telcos helping on global pandemic prevention. What you run frequently into the issue that the technical teams on both sides don't find each other because the senior government officials and the senior business leaders aren't quite knowledgeable enough how to build this bridge between knowledgeable people on both sides. It's pretty, and that is partially hardened by the fact that not enough organizations have these digital and AI capabilities which are needed for that kind of interchange. The second one is trust on data, where obviously different continents think about it differently. Like you would find different mindsets in Europe versus the US, and for sure versus China, in terms of privacy and regulations for data. But more fundamentally, when it comes to the question of making use of data in order to improve, for example, healthcare outcomes or public health, as one example, it is fundamental trust building which is needed. For example, if you want to predict the next epidemic and prevent it, it would be highly useful to pool all of the world's telco data and see where everybody is. And that, of course, is something the telcos between themselves will have a hard time to do. So we are looking into technologies and ways to more selectively share data, but then also how to keep that safe, and building ecosystems and governance structures in order to do such projects.
Yeah. Trust is such an important part, especially it's made complicated because institutional trust is at an all-time low.
That's exactly right, and that's hard to overcome. At the same time, we are seeing a lot of examples where progress is being made, and the most significant examples are in B2B industries, value chain changes like airlines and their suppliers and even their customers sharing data in order to make the travel experience better. Over time, you might actually board a plane without a passport because there is your digital identity is linked to where you are and stuff like that. So the customer experience becomes better by selective sharing between security agencies, airlines, and airports, sharing data in order to make sure only people are going into a plane who should be going into a plane, make it safer and the customer experience better. So that's kind of happening, and then of course there is the B2C platforms where the technology platforms which rely on essentially people sharing data about themselves in order to create value for estimating their future needs and ensuring they get efficient ways offering to them via advertisement and so on. And obviously there are more and more challenges to that, and cyber and trust challenges in this field. I would say in general that's a very kind of immature, early days on this, and more regulation and more responsible use of data is needed to improve.
Do you think in the future people are likely to give up their privacy for added digital benefits? We are already seeing that, but do you think in future it'll be more or less?
It's very hard to generalize. I do think there will be very specific opportunities where people will be quite happy with that. In the case of somebody who is, for example, chronically ill and needs to manage the condition, and they will probably be very happy with sharing data, in particular, with providers and others who need to have the data to improve outcomes. On the opposite end, we will probably, it's hard to speculate about these things, but we will probably see challenges where either criminal abuse or just human error is causing challenges to particular platforms. So data get public which shouldn't be get public, or data get shared with people who shouldn't be using them. And as these events occur, probably there will be a general reaction, particularly in the West, I would say. Probably China is slightly different.
Right. We're just approaching the end. I have two quick questions. One is that for anyone looking at your career from the outside, it just seems like one glorious achievement after the other, lots of successes, but I'm sure there have been some challenges. Could you share one or share a learning from how you bounced back from one such challenge?
Well, of course. I think when you work in professional services, the single most important metric that you actually do something useful is if you have a lot of impact in your clients. And over time, particularly over a longer period in a career, you kind of need to reinvent yourself a bit. If you just keep doing the same thing, you tend to become quite stale. So early days in my career, for example, I was very, very interested in pharmaceuticals, how they get made, and how to develop molecules, and spent literally quite focused time on that. And I at some point found that I was quite good at it, and worked with a client and had a good time. But at some point also realized that, if you wish, it became a bit stale. And what I then decided to do, to go to the complete opposite and just say, let's change I say in healthcare, but I look at health systems. Like, how is a country's healthcare system actually being run, and how can it be made better? And I think the main learning out of that was it was actually quite helpful to literally completely reinvent and do something completely new. Not overnight, it takes time. But the beauty of a professional services environment like McKinsey is that you can do these shifts in a gradual way. But after a couple of years, then also giving up the situations which you have been spending a lot of your life with. So getting comfortable to leave things behind and moving on to something else in a staged and managed way. That is, I've done a few times, and it's not easy because you have a destination, but you might not be at the world expert on the activity which is required in that new field. But this kind of reinventing yourself, I think, is a very important element of creating a sustainable and also, frankly, exciting career.
Wonderful. Last question. So basically, Network Capital is a global community of young people helping each other to make smart career choices. But it's very confusing, Nicolaus. Everyone has an opinion on careers. There's media telling us different kinds of things. We want to know from you, if you were to give advice to somebody just joining the workforce or thinking about what to study, when to study, what are some principles that he or she should keep in mind for careers of tomorrow, building meaningful careers of tomorrow?
It's a big question. I think the first and two or three things which come to mind. The first thing is think as much about who you spend time with compared to with what you actually want to do. So your learning and your development is largely shaped from the kind of people you spend time with, the kind of organizations, problems, countries, situations you get exposure to. So managing the individuals, but also the institutions you have exposure to, is incredibly important, particularly at early stages in career. So picking organizations which have a good track record in developing people, and within those, spending time with people who kind of are on the same wavelength and and have an interest in developing people is probably one of the most important things to think about, in addition to what you would be doing. In terms of the what you want to be doing, I do agree with a lot of people who say never create a job you wouldn't take yourself, or make sure you're spending time on things you actually are having some kind of passion and excitement for. When there's a lot of very interesting professional fields, and I think finding a niche in which you have personally some excitement and passion for is probably quite important for creating the energy to contribute at appropriate levels.
Wonderful. And keep reinventing. Nicolaus, from a very heavy day in London, thanks very much for your time. We really appreciate it. Your interview will go out and reach thousands of people. Thanks very much for sharing your insights and for being there with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.